From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Estefanía Bravo. We begin in New York, where Salvadorian President Salvador Sánchez Serén is about to speak. Let's listen in.
Latin America, on her election as President of the 73rd session of the General Assembly. And I would like to pay tribute to Kofi Annan, whose most commendable work heading the United Nations left us with a great legacy of peace and a fairer international economic order. El Salvador conveys its condolences over the recent death of the President of the Republic of Vietnam, Tran Dai Quang. And may I extend our solidarity to the people and government of the United States over the damage done by Hurricane Florence, and to the Philippines and China, who have also suffered from devastating typhoons. Distinguished delegates, this year we are called on to make the United Nations relevant to all people. Global leadership and shared responsibility for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies. We want to reach everybody without any discrimination whatsoever. We want to provide public policies and effective, good tools so as to meet the needs and aspirations of the people. This has been a priority for El Salvador during my term of office. Our social protection programs have been successful in helping over 400,000 people emerge from poverty between 2015 and 2017. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda has become a very useful tool for implementing our national policies. We were one of the first to adopt Agenda 2030 with a view to minimizing the consequences of decades of extreme social inequality and a historic lack of interest on the part of our state to meet the needs and demands of our people. El Salvador joins the appeal of the Secretary-General Antonio Guterres about the urgent need to close the funding gap for the Sustainable Development Objectives. We have allocated about 50% of our national budget to social development. This is unprecedented in my country. However, despite all of our efforts, our national resources will not be adequate, and it is essential that the international community shoulder its part. The contributions it makes must be part of an integrated long-term approach to ensure inclusive economic growth and to bring millions of people out of poverty, for today they are suffering from the worst consequences of climate change and unfair distribution of wealth. For middle-income countries like El Salvador, the key is to support and complement what we can do by way of funding, particularly public funding. Our country is vulnerable in many respects. Recently, we had one of the longest droughts in our history, and this was something which was caused by climate change. This meant that we had to invest more to ensure food security for families and to keep food prices stable. To deal with the situation, it's essential that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change continue to operate and that a solution be found to the current crisis of the Green Climate Fund. El Salvador is a country that produces virtually no pollution, but it does suffer from the effects of climate change, which is caused by others. We urgently need access to funding in order to mitigate and adapt so as to make our people safe and resilient. With the Bonn initiative, we are now moving to large-scale restoration of our ecosystems And this is an example of how a small country with limited financial resources can in fact protect its environment. Here I would like to express my profoundest thanks to Mr. Eric Solheim, Executive Director of the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, for supporting our proposal to declare 2020 to 30 the United Nations Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. And we would invite this General Assembly to consider that initiative in a coordinated manner in order to tackle the ever faster loss of forestry, the soil degradation and the degradation of ecosystems, which have a negative impact on the well-being of 3.2 billion people. We were one of the heads of state who, at the unforgettable and historic session of the General Assembly in 2015, adopted Agenda 2030, and today we have achieved real results, seeking to reduce poverty and reduce inequalities. My government has given priority to social protection in our development strategy, and we have reduced poverty by 10% between 2009 and 17. We also adopted a national literacy program. We now have 100 municipalities which have no illiteracy, including San Salvador, which has become the third Central American capital to achieve this. We will continue to promote literacy, and here we have the generous support of over 50,000 young volunteers and other sectors in society that are helping us. And in this endeavor, we have found extremely useful the support of the people and government of the sister Republic of Cuba, who are an example for Latin America and the world in eliminating illiteracy using the method, Yes, I Can. We are defending women's rights. We have a strategy for preventing femicide and sexual violence. This involves all governmental institutions. We are seeking to empower women and ensure they have a life free from violence. This was strengthened with the initiative called Spotlight, supported by the European Union and the United Nations, and it seeks to eliminate social practices and institutional practices that offend the dignity of women. We have also promoted the program Women's City, which is universally acknowledged and applied. This has led to over 1.8 million people getting health services, help in defending their rights, job training, and funding for economic projects. In the area of health, may I mention our national strategy for reducing maternal mortality and our national plan for monitoring health. These two tools have helped El Salvador reduce its maternal mortality rate. In 2017, it was down to 31 per 100,000 births. In these very important efforts, we have had the spiritual guidance and a message of peace for social justice from the Blessed Oscar Arnulfo Romero, who on 14 October will be canonized by Pope Francis. This is a historic event, and our people will be celebrating with joy and hope. Mr. President, one particularly relevant issue at the global and regional levels is migration. We welcome the upcoming adoption of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration and the Global Compact for Refugees. These are clear examples of how the United Nations is involved in seeking new worldwide consensus. We have to look at migration from the standpoint of human rights so that we can benefit from it and so that we can take up the challenges it faces us with. This year, many migrant families, coming mainly from the Northern Triangle in Central America, have faced very difficult and painful situations because they have been separated. This has done irreparable psychological and emotional damage to girls, boys, and teenagers. The higher interests of the child and the family must be respected, regardless of their migration status. May I reiterate El Salvador's request to the United States authorities to speed up the process of reunification of minors who arrive at the border, whether or not they are accompanied by their family members. In recent years, El Salvador has been working to improve living conditions by promoting investment, developing human capital, promoting security, preventing violence, combating criminal trafficking networks and drug trafficking inter alia. This has helped us to reduce by 60% irregular migration of Salvadorans towards the United States. We absolutely reject any criminalization of migrants. Experience has shown that with their work ethic, they contribute to the economic, social, and cultural development of the societies of destination. A clear example is our people who enjoy temporary protection status and the DACA program. And for years, they have been contributing to the progress of the nation. We want to urge the competent bodies in the United States to apply the legal instruments to provide greater migration stability and permanent residency for people under the TPS and DACA programs. Mr. President, El Salvador is a founding member of the United Nations. We respect international law. We acknowledge the importance of multilateralism in taking up global challenges, such as peace, a fairer economic order, climate change, migration, and sustainable development. And so, we stress the need for constructive dialogue, reaching agreements, cooperation, strengthening the mechanisms for integration and regional alliances. Given the crisis and conflicts in the world today, it is really important to focus on dialogue and political solutions. On 30 June last, there was a meeting of the presidents of the SICA countries in Santo Domingo, and we spoke about the situation in our sister Republic of Nicaragua. We would once again call for dialogue and reaching agreement. This is the way to build and preserve peace, vis-à-vis with respect for the Constitution and the rule of law. To ensure that the international community moves ahead towards development, we must stop unilateral measures such as the unjust and anachronistic economic, trade, and financial blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States. That coercive measure must end because it brings such incalculable damage to the Cuban people. Also, an end must be put to economic sanctions against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This affects its international payments and the provision of goods and services, and it really harms the living conditions of the people. We call for respect for self-determination and sovereignty for the Venezuelan people. We reject external interference and threats of military intervention. Mr. President, I would like to thank the United Nations and the Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, for the valuable contribution to our development programs for the well-being and tranquility of Salvadoran families. We would thank them also for the support they've provided for our national dialogue and to build new agreements following on from the peace agreements which we signed in January of 1992. El Salvador is determined to contribute to anything the United Nations can do to make sure that the United Nations is relevant to all people, provides global leadership and shared responsibility for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies. We are sure that with the commitments we have undertaken under the 2030 Agenda, we will move ahead in building an El Salvador that is united, prosperous, and peaceful. Thank you very much.
That was Salvadoran President Salvador Sánchez Serén addressing the UN General Assembly. He talked about El Salvador's battle for social development, and he said more funding is needed to combat climate change. More stories now. The International Monetary Fund has boosted a loan approved for Argentina to boost $57 billion. The IMF announced an agreement reached for an additional $7 billion from the Argentinian consulate in New York. An early release of $19 billion was also agreed and will happen between now and the end of 2019. Thousands of people in Argentina have been on strike this week against the government's policies and the deal with the IMF. And in New York, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has arrived to attend the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Maduro, who touched down in New York a few hours ago, will soon address world leaders at the UN summit. Speculation is rife about a possible meeting between Venezuela's leader and the U.S. President Donald Trump in New York. Although neither side has yet announced a date or time for the proposed talks, before arriving, Maduro declared that he's going to the United Nations to defend the truth about Venezuela.
I am coming to the General Assembly of the United Nations to defend the truth about Venezuela, to bring the voice of our country. Today, Wednesday, the 26th of September, at exactly 1:16 in the afternoon, I'm coming to receive the solidarity of the governments and peoples of the world with what is really happening in Venezuela, in our beloved country of Bolívar. Greetings to our people. I'm full of emotion to let the world know that Venezuela is resisting. We are stronger now than ever with the revolution of the 21st century.
U.S. President Donald Trump, upon arrival at the UN, said he is willing to meet Maduro if time permits.
If I had time, I would. I mean, to be honest with you, he has to straighten it out. He's got to act a lot more humanely. The people are suffering tremendously in Venezuela. There's no reason for this. So I would certainly be open to it. I'm willing to meet with anybody. Anytime I can save lives and help people, if it's one life, I'm certainly willing.
The possibility of a meeting was first put forward by President Maduro on Tuesday.
I am willing to talk to Donald Trump. I wish if we can arrange a face-to-face conversation between Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro. Each U.S. sanction, besides being useless, is a medal for the revolutionaries, because it shows that we are brave and we are on the right path. The United States believe they can govern the world. They cannot. The world has changed. The empires are dying, and humanity is on the rise.
Earlier, we spoke with activist and writer Nino Paglia to elaborate on how the U.S. and Venezuela's relations are moving.
On the one hand, for public consumption, in terms of showing an openness from the part of the United States, Trump specifically. On the other hand, it's kind of hard to imagine a fair and respectful dialogue when the attitude shown by Trump and the U.S. administration is quite the contrary. There is no willingness to give in from what appears to be a deliberate goal of regime change in Venezuela. You cannot just reconcile the two things. On the other hand, from Maduro's standpoint, we know that Maduro is quite open to dialogue because he comes from a position of not having any conditions on the dialogue that he would like to have.
And in the Security Council, Bolivia's President Evo Morales condemned the U.S. interference in the Middle East. Morales criticized the U.S. policies against Iran. He has also rejected any attempt of intervention in Venezuela.
Bolivia categorically condemns the unilateral actions imposed by the government of the United States of America against Iran. Likewise, we condemn the fact that the United States has withdrawn from the JCPOA, hiding behind pretexts to continue its policy of interference and meddling in the internal affairs of this brother country, Iran.
Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel has made his first speech in the General Assembly. He has called on the U.S. to end the blockade against the island and said this is the main obstacle for the two countries to normalize their ties. Díaz-Canel also criticized the continuous threats from the U.S. to Venezuela of a possible intervention.
The potential for a smooth, fluent business relationship is well known, and a genuine and respectful understanding would be in the best interest of the entire region. However, the essential and defining element of the bilateral relationship continues to be the blockade, which seeks to suffocate the Cuban economy in order to bring about hardships and disrupt our constitutional order. It is a cruel policy, punishing Cuban families and the entire nation.
Nambian President Hage Geingob has called for the immediate lifting of the blockade against Cuba. Geingob hailed Cuba as a long-standing friend who stood with the people of Nambia during their darkest days. He added its government and people played a decisive role in the liberation of Nambia. This especially in the Battle of Quito-Guanavele, which led to negotiations and the eventual independence of his country. For his part, Yemeni President Abed Rabo Mansour Hadi referred to the humanitarian response plan in his country. He asked world leaders to honor their pledges to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. Nearly 4 years of fighting between Houthi rebels and a Saudi-led coalition has left millions of people in need of humanitarian aid. In April, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the war as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, sat down with our correspondent, Jorge Gestoso, for an exclusive interview. He said U.S. President Donald Trump has a very narrow sense of patriotism. Let's listen to him.
How can you intervene? What are the circumstances under which you can intervene in another sovereign state's internal affairs? There's a matter of self-defense. If you are going hot pursuit in relation to self-defense, if there's an egregious breach of international law, like for example, the matter of genocide taking place, or if you have a system of government based on the separation of races, as in South Africa, in those circumstances, international law would justify an intervention on the basis of a resolution at the Security Council. You just can't go off on your own, on a whim and saying, well, look, this government is against, I don't like this government. This government is acting contrary to our interests, or this government is incompetent, or there are some humanitarian issues which have arisen. No. What sort of a world would we have? It means, therefore, that if black people have been shot in Ferguson or anywhere in the United States, or there's any incompetent government anywhere in the United States, or you have poverty in the Appalachia or in certain areas of urban America, that doesn't justify anybody to intervene in the United States of America. They have their institutions to address those questions. And people in the respective countries must be allowed to address these matters for themselves, by themselves.
And President Nicolas Maduro has had bilateral meetings ahead of his address to the General Assembly. Maduro met with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. The meeting comes just a year after both leaders met in Kazakhstan during the summit of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on Telesuba.
Welcome back. Mexico's President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador says he will set up a commission to investigate the disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students 4 years ago.
El día 1 de diciembre.
On December 1st, we will issue a decree to create an investigating commission if it has not been done yet. We will define the entire procedure we are going to carry out until we reach truth and justice.
López Obrador's commitment comes on the 4th anniversary of the students' disappearance. Clashes erupted between police and protesters calling for justice. Relatives of the students reject the official version on the case and demand the authorities to clarify the case. And still in Mexico, police force in the coastal resort town of Acapulco is under investigation amid suspicions of being affiliated with drug gangs. 2 commanders accused of murder were arrested, while the rest of the city's police have been disarmed. State police and the military will patrol the city instead. Women have marched in Sao Paulo against presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro. They denounced sexism and an attack on women's rights.
Women have marched in Sao Paulo to reject the presidential candidacy of far-right politician Jair Bolsonaro.
We consider that former President Dilma Rousseff was the victim of several sexist and misogynist attacks. We are also saying our rights under attack, especially our workers' rights. Women are those who suffer the most precarious in the job market. We women earn less than men.
One of the members of the Facebook group, Women United Against Bolsonaro, was attacked just outside her house by 3 men. The group has over 3 million followers.
We are organizing over 200 events to protest against Bolsonaro. Several women have their social media hacked or have even been threatened. There is a clear demonstration that they don't want women in the streets showing their political opinion.
The march was headed by Ana Estela Haddad, wife of Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad. Vice presidential candidate Manuela Dávila joined her.
We represent half of Brazil. There is no development project in our country that considers women are an important part of any project.
Fernando Haddad joined the demonstrations by the end. He assured that women will be at the center of his government program.
I want to commit with you. We will implement it until the last consequences. This will be healthy for all. A balanced society is a peace society.
Brazil is in the final stretch towards presidential elections. Bolsonaro remains first on the polls, but women demonstrations can materialize in ballot boxes as they shout, "Sexism will not pass."
Ecuador's public prosecutor has accused former President Rafael Correa of ordering a kidnapping and criminal association. 3 former members of the intelligence agency were also accused. The judiciary is investigating the kidnapping of former Assemblyman Fernando Valda in 2012. Jamaica and Denmark have discussed the possibility of partnering in areas of energy and tourism. Prime Minister Andrew Holmes reaffirmed his intention for Jamaica to become a world leader in sustainable development. He met with his Danish counterpart at the United Nations General Assembly and shared details of their meeting on Twitter. Fears about Tropical Storm Kirk have resurfaced, prompting officials from Barbados and St. Lucia to issue a warning. In the early hours of Wednesday morning, the Barbados Meteorological Services said that the storm is expected to pass through the island on Thursday. They will be monitoring the storm to report on its exact intensity in due course. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.